So the last step to ceramics generally is glazing. This will add color, durability, and food safeness depending on the glaze. The first thing is to make sure your piece is what's called bisqueware. That is where your piece has been fired one time. So on the right is not bisque, it is pale gray because it is dry, but it is very fragile. And on the left is bisqueware. You can see it's sort of this peach color. That is what we want to glaze. All right, first thing is to wipe your piece down. Don't do this a lot, oversaturating it, just barely damp, and this removes dust and debris and helps make sure a good glaze application happens. But if you oversaturate it, then it needs to dry out for like a day before you actually glaze. So you need to decide what color glaze you want. So you can look at our test tiles on the wall over here and see which ones you like, find the name, and if the name isn't there or if it's gotten misplaced, the name also exists on the back. And then you need to figure out what color you want and find your glaze. So we can also see there's a few other options. This shows our ceramic watercolors with clear over it. So again, find the color you want. Then under the table is where our glazes live. So you're going to find the glaze, confirm that it is the right glaze. Don't rely just on the top lid. Make sure you check the bottom. You might want to use what's called wax resist, completely optional, but this is great for protecting certain areas from not getting glaze on them. So it can be used both as a protective coat on the bottom or the sides. Do not use our glaze brushes for wax. Use these kind of like orange, yellowish handled brushes. So I'm just using a random, what's called a chuck for my demo, so this isn't like a fancy piece. So I could use it to protect the bottom or the side as a decorative element. So I could make this swoop out of wax, and you can see it is going to start to dry. And the important thing with this is I want to wash my brush right away so the wax does not dry and basically ruin my brush unless I add really hot water to clean it. Make sure the lid is also on, although I would give you a warning, don't assume the lid is always on when you're using it. All right, so I have my, my glaze here, and it has settled. This is very normal because glaze particles have heavier components. Don't use it like this or you will not get the result that the example shows because the example is using properly mixed glaze. Mix your glaze well. I often will start with a ladle and then switch to a whisk. Generally speaking, the consistency of glaze is around heavy cream. See me if you are a little worried about it or think it might need some water. I like to use the lid to rest my tools so that one, I don't lose them in the glaze, and two, so that they don't just get glaze all over the table. All right, so I'm going to glaze this piece. There's a few techniques that you can use for glazing, and one is not necessarily better than the other, right? It just depends on maybe a few options. The first thing though is that I like to glaze the interior. Now again, this isn't an actual mug, but if I had a mug, I would glaze the inside first with my ladle it in and then kind of swirl it out. When I glaze the exterior, a few choices. I could brush, and I would want 2 layers. So I'd brush on, say, horizontally. Now, I would actually let this dry before I brushed vertically, and this overlaps my layers because sometimes you still will see these brush strokes. Another option would be to ladle, to just basically pour with my ladle. There might be some overlap. That could be nice in terms of detail. Or I could dip. I do have some glaze tongs for dipping if holding it doesn't really work. And I would just dip until I had it where I wanted it. Remember that wax resist? Well, here you can see how it is making sure that the glaze does not stick in that area. Now, you will get some glaze that sort of kind of is thick enough that it will hold, so wipe that off. Finally, make sure you clean the bottom and lower edge. If you do not do this, it will stick the project, your piece, to the kiln shelf. So it is critical that you clean the bottom. And now it's time to clean up your tools. I'm going to do this while my project is drying. So I have this rinse bucket over here, and this is for just kind of like a pre-rinse. Do not leave your tools in here. Don't think this is the final rinsing stage, right? So I'm going to rinse off in this bucket. I'm going to do a final rinse in the sink with my tools, and then my brush, I want to use some soap to make sure I really get all the glaze out of there. I want to wash it until the water runs clear. This is especially important if I use a darker glaze. And then of course we want to wipe down the table. This is like the glaze table or anywhere else that you're working, and put your glaze piece on the shelf to be fired. And then that's it.